this is the third panel of this conference entitled Connecting the Dots, Energy, Technology and Trade. And before I give some words of a description of what this panel is about, I would first ask Mr. David Karapetyan, who is the Secretary General of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Armenia, to have a keynote speech or a scene-setting speech before this panel. So, Mr. Karapetyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my utmost pleasure to address you at the Budapest Global Dialogue. At the outset, allow me to thank the ORF Foundation and the Hungary Institute for International Affairs for organizing this forum, which is a timely opportunity to exchange views on the multifaceted global threats and jointly seek for solutions for quick and sustainable response to the matters that require immediate reactions. Today, the world is facing grave challenges such as ferocious armed conflicts, geopolitical tensions, and mistrust. The triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Lack of financing for development and debt crisis. These diverse threats are seriously undermining the maintenance of international peace, sustainable development, and human rights, thus leaving many countries unable to invest in development progress. No country can address alone to these global challenges. Efficient and timely response to the emerging global crisis require consolidated and coherent actions by the international community to reach people in need while leaving no one behind. Effective multilateralism is key to advancing human rights, rule of law, eradicating poverty, ensuring food security, promoting social inclusion, gender equality, and empowerment of youth. Throughout the 3 decades of its independence, Armenia has been consistently contributing to strengthening of multilateralism aid aimed at maintenance of international peace and security, protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Today as well, our message is the following. Let us seize the opportunities provided by dialogue and partnership based on alignment of economic interests with shared values to contribute to a more interconnected and harmonious world for improving livelihoods of people, advancing environmentally resilient economic growth, and developing human capital. This brings me to a concrete example of contribution by my country to enhancing multilateral dialogue in order to shape the way for promotion of mutually beneficial collaboration. September this year, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, in collaboration with ORF Foundation, hosted the first Yerevan Dialogue event, thus offering an ample platform to discuss global challenges, define common rules, and shape ways towards a safer and brighter future. Based on the success of the inaugural dialogue and guided by the firm commitment to strengthen multi-stakeholder deliberations for exchanging views on pressing global needs, we have already started preparations for the second Yerevan Dialogue, which will take place next year, and I kindly invite everyone here to come and participate. Historically, Armenia has always been at the crossroads connecting the north to the south and the west to the east, with all the political, trade, and cultural features arising from this. Today as well, our country, due to its favorable geographical location and following its historical legacy, can promote the economic exchanges, people-to-people contacts, and cultural ties between Asia and Europe. Against the backdrop of the fragile global economic and geopolitical situation, we more than ever need to shape a way to better economic connectivity, which will allow us to establish pragmatic trade arrangements built on common interests in various fields of development, such as energy, transport, and trade. Armenia is a long-standing advocate of promoting inclusive and equitable regional and cross-border connectivity. Removal of all political barriers from the free movement of people, goods and services, in particular in terms of realization of the economic and social rights and the right to development of all peoples, is a prerequisite for the promotion of developing countries' integration into global markets. We are convinced that unblocking of all trade and transport communication in South Caucasus will open new opportunities for the movement of cargo, goods and citizens, therefore becoming a cornerstone of security, stability and prosperity in the region and beyond. Driven by the firm belief that regional dialogue is the key to establishing mutual beneficial collaborations, the government of Armenia has introduced the Crossroads of Peace initiative, guided by the vision of comprehensiveness, inclusiveness, non-discriminatory use of regional infrastructure, and building a prosperous future for all interested parties. This project aims at the development of communications between the countries of the region by means of renovating, building and operating roads, railways, cables, and electricity lines with full respect for the state's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and principles of equality and reciprocity. The Crossroads of Peace project places a significant emphasis on building mutual trust as the foundation for peace. By actively engaging with its neighbors and international partners, Armenia seeks to rebuild new cooperation in the region and foster understanding among nations. Through diplomatic initiatives, dialogue, and cultural exchange, we aspire to bridge divides and create an environment where nations can work together to confront global challenges. This initiative has the potential to foster regional cooperation on multiple fronts, including promotion of renewable energy investments, promoting sustainable development, and ensuring a secure future for all communities in the region. These communications could effectively link the Gulf, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea, thus significantly contributing to the integration of our region into global transport chains and bringing enormous benefits to all countries of our region. Distinguished guests, Armenia is a landlocked developing country with limited natural resources and the lack of industrial-scale fossil fuel resources. In this vein, key priorities for Armenia to ensure its energy independence and security include the development of expansion of economically viable and technically available renewable energy sources. In this regard, solar energy has become one of the most important directions of the development of the energy system in Armenia in recent years. Today, more than 5% of the total electricity production comes from solar power plants, and the Strategic Energy Development Program aims to increase the share of solar energy to 15% by 2013. In order to expand the network of the international partners, Armenia has recently joined the International Solar Alliance, which we believe is becoming one of the most important platforms for dialogue on driving energy transition and advancing green energy. In an age characterized by rapid technological progress, the digital sphere represents unprecedented opportunities to address pressing challenges spanning economic growth, social equity, and environmental stewardship. Over the last few decades, we have witnessed an unprecedented technological revolution, which has truly opened a new page in the history of humanity. On the other hand, the digital domain has become a new battleground where competition for influence, data, and access to emerging technologies is intensifying. Issues such as cybersecurity, digital sovereignty, and the control of critical technologies are now central to discussions of national security and international relations. Armenia sees technology as a fundamental pillar of its future economic prosperity. Our government has prioritized the development of a robust digital economy with initiatives aimed at fostering innovation, enhancing digital infrastructure, and improving access to modern technologies. We strongly believe that adopting digital innovation can lead us to a future that is fairer and better able to bounce back from challenges for everyone. Armenia's thriving tech ecosystem, particularly in sectors like information technology, artificial intelligence, and fintech, is already contributing significantly to our GDP, creating jobs and facilitating trade. Armenia is committed to leveraging digital advancement as the catalyst for sustainable development. Through collaborative efforts with governments, industry leaders, civil society, and academia, we aim to unlock the full potential of digital innovation. Together, we can tackle vital priorities such as economic empowerment, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability by expanding access to digital services, promoting literacy, and fostering innovation, we seek to empower individuals and communities across our region. We believe that no country should be left behind in the digital age. The digital divide must be addressed to ensure equitable access to the benefits of technological innovation, and Armenia is committed to fostering international cooperation in this regard. In conclusion, allow me once again to express our profound gratitude to organizers of today's debate and wish everyone fruitful discussions. Let us make the best use of this opportunity to reiterate our commitment to the renewed multilateralism aimed to better reflection of tomorrow's realities and more effective response to upcoming challenges and opportunities to achieve safe, equal, sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous future for the generations to come. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karapetyan, for your valuable thoughts on something that initiates very well this panel, which is about geoeconomics and geopolitics. And I think when anyone talks about peace, he talks about the most important point of geoeconomics and geopolitics, how to maintain peace, but also how to manage contest and collaboration. But our ultimate aim is, of course, to have peace and economic growth in all our regions in, let's say, a more sustainable and a more equitable international system. So let me begin this panel connecting the dots, energy, technology, and trade. This is Tamás Baranyi, Director for Strategy and the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs. To have some more words about what this panel is about is again something profound to geoeconomics and geopolitics, which is something very 21st century thing. How those three things, energy, trade, and technology, came together to form something that profoundly shapes the international system. And just to mention a few key characteristics is the amplifying effect of technological change, including artificial intelligence, and the way how countries do not only see opportunities for cooperation, but also for contest. And there is also the tendency that it seems that the fourth industrial revolution, if you can so name it, is being increasingly dominated by the winners of the first industrial revolution, which is, of course, again, goes counter to a more democratic and more equitable international system. So what to do with it, or is it the natural thing that happens in the international arena? Or just another example, all we want is a sustainable future and more clear energy to have, but from year to year, new peaks of fossil fuel productions are reached globally, and this tendency is not only characteristic of the global south, but mainly the global north. At the same time, there are tendencies to downplay the importance of atomic energy, but there are, of course, geopolitical realities that really forces countries to diversify their energy mix. So what to do with it? And most importantly, when it comes to trade and infrastructure, and it was very good start that you, Mr. Karapetyan, also mentioned the inclusiveness of infrastructure projects. So this is also something of a point of contention among states who will bring infrastructure to where, and will it be inclusive or exclusive? And the largest question, of course, which impacts the whole of the international system is trade. So gated trading practices, nationalizing and securitizing international trade is something very new to the international discourse, but it's rapidly gaining traction. So this is something, again, we should focus on when discussing the possible changes of the world in which we live. So those are, in a nutshell, the topics that is in the center of this discussion. And now I will turn to the initiators of this discussion. And first, I would introduce Mr. Eric Solheim, former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. Please, Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will make 3 broad statements connecting the dots. First, China is now the absolutely indispensable nation in the world for everything green. Look, last year, China was 60% of solar, wind, hydropower, electric batteries, electric cars, high-speed rail, metros, whatever you can think of. China was at the minimum 60%, often more. And China is by far the biggest tree planter in the world. China last year invested $900 billion in solar and wind and renewables. That's as much as the total GDP of Turkey. And Turkey is not a small nation, as you all know. It's a higher middle-income country. China invested as much in green industry as the GDP of Turkey. And if you look at the companies, Tongwei, which is the biggest solar company in the world, that company alone would be the 6th biggest producer of green energy in the world, solar, if it was a nation. It would be China, US, India, Brazil, Germany, Tongwei, Japan. And there are 5 or 6 companies nearly the size of Tongwei in China. So any nation who want to go green and want to go renewable need to discuss its relationship to China. For sure Europe, for sure America can go green without China, just it will be much more expensive, which means it will be much slower, because cost is the key thing. Look, solar energy is now the cheapest energy everywhere in the world. 10 years ago, it was an enormous cost if you switched from coal to solar. Now you save money if you switch from coal to solar, thanks to this industrial development. The obvious answer to this for Europe is let's find joint ventures, let's cooperate with China, let's invite these Chinese companies to invest in China, and let's work together. By the way, that's exactly how China itself developed. I met with CATL, which is far the biggest battery maker in the world. They told me that in the early days of CATL, we could never have done without BMW, the German car maker, because they were our very demanding customer and they shared their technology. Now CATL is far ahead of BMW. We should invite CATL. I think they're contemplating investing in Hungary, if I'm not mistaken. We should invite them to Europe to learn from their technology, because this exactly the same applies to every other part of the world. If you don't want to work with China, the green transformation and the energy independence will be much slower. Second, the core problem in Europe is the lack of productivity. We are now at 0 productivity growth. That has huge repercussions for politics, because it means when there's no productivity growth, everything is about distribution. No productivity growth. If we want to give more to the rural population, well, it has to be less to the urban population. If we want to give more to the very poor, well, it has to be less to the upper middle class. Everything is about distribution unless there is productivity growth. And that's, of course, why nearly all European governments are kicked out after one period. Look to Germany now. Only God the Almighty can save Chancellor Scholz. If you have no growth, it's very, very hard for politicians to run a country. What's remarkable is that there is hardly any debate in Europe as to how we can improve our productivity. But unless we do that, this will just be over and over again the same problem. And lastly, we discussed the problems of Europe. Why are we so arrogant that we don't try to look to those who are much better than us? And I will make a very revolutionary solution, which I know many Europeans don't want to listen to. But the most popular leader in any democratic nation in the world, well, that's Prime Minister Modi of India. Why don't we learn from him? His policy is not rocket science. It's identifying the identity of India, rooting Indian self-confidence in the Vedas, in the ancient histories of India. Well, we can do the same in Europe. Focusing on development, bringing everyone out of poverty. Of course, we can do the same in Europe. And it's radiating optimism. All European leaders are pessimists. That's a very difficult proposition for people. I listened to Prime Minister Modi just a few weeks ago in the Indian city of Ahmedabad. He spoke for 1 hour about climate change and environment. Not once in that discussion he ever mentioned all the problems with climate change. It was nothing about sea level rise or droughts or cyclones, nothing of that. Just how can green energies, solar and wind and hydropower, lift Indians out of poverty, create a large Indian middle class, and allow India to shine on the international arena. And these 3 elements, rooting your identity, focusing on economic development, and being a little bit of optimist, well, that's a recipe which is very successful for Prime Minister Modi. By the way, it was also very successful for President Jokowi in Indonesia, exactly the same. So why don't we learn a little bit from that in Europe when we are in such an identity crisis, which the previous discussion showcased. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for your sharp and straightforward points. But let's move on to Violetta Bulc, former European Commissioner for Transport. So, Violetta, what is your take on those issues?
Thank you very much, and I would like to continue this discussion with a clear invitation to make the 4th and the 5th industrial revolution human-centric and planet-friendly. In the emerging VUCA world, our Western civilization, which is more and more technology-based, seem to be trapped in old mindsets, imperialistic social and economic models, too rigid to respond swiftly to the challenges it's facing. We seem to be driven by control, centralization, technological dominance beyond its functions as a tool, but rather driving it towards transhumanism. I would argue that one of the reasons for this is a very narrow perspective, which lies in the exhausted male vision of the world, which sees war as the ultimate tool for keeping the world balanced and technology as its main enabler. So I suggest that we do recognize this geostrategic positioning not only on a physical world, but very much in a digital world as well. And I would like to invite you to explore with me 3 horizontal challenges relevant to this discussion over all 3 topics that are proposed. First, digital service slavery. People becoming administrators for all digital services, which actually are generating 20 to 30% of profit yearly based on the latest Deloitte study. But with that in mind, with all those profits and gains, we have almost no human interactions anymore, no sensitivity and care to help people, only predefined set of options that one has to choose from. We're losing perspective of the humanity and life itself. Second, market-driven spending on technology without regulatory imposed compatibility and standardization. To capitalize on the use of new services, digital services, fully, one needs to change the devices every 2 to 5 years. This is often driven by hardware limitations, app requirements, or software updates no longer supported on old models. Can we stop this vicious spiral growth and really ensure a better utilization of used resources invested in the technology? And I would certainly suggest that we take this issue seriously, otherwise technology is just another tool for deepening the development gaps and social unrests. Third, last but not least, gender-biased technology in apps and data. The UN Global Campaign Orange the World concluded this Tuesday that gender issue in technology is highly, highly relevant. Artificial intelligence, gaming platforms, and even digital trade infrastructure are overwhelmingly being created by man for man. This imbalance has very real consequences. A recent report co-produced by UNESCO and the 8 Goals 1 Foundation from India reveals that over 4 decades of gaming history, only 6% of video game main characters have been women. When women are included, they are often reduced to stereotypes. Hypersexualized, marginalized, or side characters needed male protection. Moreover, 49% of women gamers have reported abuse or harassment online. For younger women, aged 18 to 24, this already figure rises to 75%. So where are we really driving our society to? Is this the future we really want to live? How to address this issue? Currently in the world, we have 3 completely different approaches to digitalization. One is US, which is data and applications are business-driven. The other one is Chinese, where everything is state-driven, and European one, where we have user-driven approach. So how to connect these dots? Absolutely necessary, we have to deal with them. Is that inclusive digital governance and forensic with female voices at the decision-making? Is this transparent accountability for digital content, apps, and platforms with mandatory accountability, or stronger global collaboration? And together, maybe we can actually address these essential elements that are often hidden and not discussed, but so essential for a prosperous and balanced society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Violetta. And now I would turn to Sujan Chinoy, who is Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis from India. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think it would be cliched to say that there is a growing intersection today between geopolitics and geoeconomics. And I would say that energy, technology, and trade are at the heart of modern-day contestation. We have seen how OPEC, for example, in the 1970s had weaponized energy. And today we can see that advanced technologies such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing are determining ineluctably the future hierarchy among nations. Those that have access to big data, rare earths, and critical minerals will no doubt steal a march over others. Digital colonization is already in place, in my view. Critical minerals are in short supply, and I think, therefore, the scenario is now shifting to deep seabed mining. That's where the new conflict and contestation will take place. Again, nations with advanced technologies will be able to exploit space also in regard to materials required for future energy and such like aspects. Today, globalization has run into immense difficulties due to uneven benefits and gaming by some. So some of the largest economies in the world, such as the United States and China, are creating firewalls, which in fact are also engaged in promoting loyal and mutually exclusive constituencies. And so this has given a push, in fact, to greater emphasis on bilateral and regional trade arrangements to fill the void that is being created by a dysfunctional WTO. Now, it's hard to absolutely sanitize any supply chains because these mingle at the end of the day. And manufacturers are taking on new identities to circumvent any kind of protectionist measures. We've seen how, for example, Chinese companies are investing in Vietnam and Mexico to access the US market. Likewise, we have seen how Russian oil, notwithstanding the sanctions and price caps, has rechannelized itself into the global market through various means. High-end technologies are more prone to restrictions, sanctions, and export controls. And governments and big tech have spent billions on, actually doing research in high tech, and they're loath to share it. But cyberspace creates a level playing field. There is a great deal of, IP theft through cyberspace. This, in fact, along with conventional forms of industrial espionage, will create friction in the future. Now, the future of the global economy, whether growth, productivity, or green transitions, will depend on the kind of energy that we use. Today, there is absolutely no consensus on what form of energy should the world use in the future. The north-south divide is vast in regard to the continued use of fossil fuels and the quantum of finance required to make necessary green transitions. While the industrialized countries have announced ambitious net zero targets, the vast majority will remain dependent on fossil fuels for the foreseeable future, and clearly more money is required for adaptation. However, the inherent inequities in the global order continue to defeat climate action goals. An egregious example is the failure of COP29 to deliver on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. Under President Trump, one may expect US production and export of fossil fuels to spike, combined with Russian oil reverting to global markets in case the war in Ukraine ends. This is going to have a dampening effect on oil prices, and that will make it much harder for countries to actually find the resources for expensive alternative sources of clean energy or renewables. In other words, the availability of cheap oil will make matters worse in regard to climate action. Lastly, Asia already accounts for more than 50% global GDP growth in recent years, and the rich countries are not ready to pay adequately for green transitions. On the other hand, the global south is not able to afford the transitions. These developments are likely to pour cold water on the European Green Deal. It is time, therefore, to resort to deep introspection on the way forward to build a new and an equitable framework for globalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sujan. And then I would turn to Arvind Gupta, who is head and co-founder of the Digital India Foundation, to share his thoughts. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Needless to say, I'm going to take off from what Ambassador Chinoy just said. Geopolitics is now even more intertwined with the field of technology than ever before. And one of the leading questions for our discussion was, is nationalism playing a role? And it is many examples across the world are clearly demonstrating that nationalism is trumping digital platforms and technology investments and capitalism. We have seen many increasing incidents that big tech is no longer neutral, and it's an extension of their the national interests and state policies to the countries that they belong to. It is with this reason that India has had banned all Chinese platforms due to their active role in the influence operations in India. So, and this is now becoming even a larger trend globally. There is a clear inflection point in technology competitiveness. I think when we say that the winners of the past industrial revolutions are going to be winners of the next industrial revolution, I totally disagree with that. The world is flat when it comes to technology and technology competitiveness. We have seen three models of technology platforms. One of the US, which I call data capitalism. One from China, which I call data surveillance. And one from India, which I call data empowerment. And this is no longer going to be just driven by the US and China. India has a model which is taking digital public infrastructure approach, and the global south is embracing that. So, I present a very alternate view of the technology world is going to be dominated by US and China. India is a very important and equal player in that world of technology. I want to present a view that one of our leading speaker had started off as saying that the world is dependent on the energy supply chains totally on China. In the world of telecom, especially 4G and 5G, India has actually presented an option which is totally China minus. We have a telecom network now in India, which is still the cheapest in the world and has no Chinese technology in it. So there is an option that exists, especially in the world of technology. Lastly, to this point of the world is flat, the AI race is wide open. Infrastructure is coming largely from the US. skills are coming from India. 40% of AI code is actually written by India or Indians living overseas. So there is still a lot of things to be done in AI, and India and US, along with China, will continue to play a very important role. Given that we are in EU, I must say that the EU has lost its competitive advantage when it comes to the field of technology. It has taken the moral high ground of regulation and lost its competitiveness if it had in producing new innovative technology solutions. It is quite unfortunate. The last 2 points I have is on trust in technology. I think as we go forward, trust in technology, friend-shoring will become a bigger norm than cost efficiencies. The supply chain movement is not only going to be based on cost, but on democratic and shared trusted values. And two, the nuances of digital sovereignty are going to dictate every country's decision on what technology they adopt and don't adopt. So this is the future prediction that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arvind. And I would turn to Tian Huafeng, who is the research director of the China Sea Institute of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I prefer to focus on energy security. This is a very important issue for countries without enough traditional energy endowment from God, like China, also EU, also Japan, also India, and also African country, etc. So when we talk the solution for the security issue in this country, we have to complicate the very important background related to energy security. I prefer complexity and uncertainty to describe the characteristic of the energy security facing in this area. The complex refers to the complex environment in which the energy development is facing. We know the turbulence and changing international landscape, the frequency occurrence of extremely climate disasters, also the low carbon transformation and the high cost related, and also the outbreak of new round of technical revolution. So all this new and old element joined has affected the current energy security issue. We can watch that the traditional security threat remains. Oil and natural gas geopolitical remain an important factor that affected the energy security. Furthermore, both the supply and demand are becoming more concentrated. This is not only in traditional energy, but also in new energy. So market forces are entering a period of intensified competition for this. In addition, there's new potential vulnerability emerge. First, like climate change and energy transition have become new sources of risk affecting energy security, no matter traditional or new energy. So extreme weather, we know, not only affect the power generation of new renewable energy, but also affect power safety by damaging transition distribution lines of the power generation facility. Energy transition, this is a very popular chat. It offers chance to build a safer and sustainable energy future. But we know there's no guarantee that this journey will be a very smooth one. We know the policy action faces significant transaction and transition costs, and the energy crisis in past 2 years have revealed the role of fossil fuel-fired power generation in transforming our power system, not only as a backup, but more importantly, when there are significant change in renewable energy generation due to weather conditions. So this fossil fuel power energy have to play their own. So the other characteristic is the uncertainty. We know the global economy currently with a slow growth rate, and there are also other like physical constraints, financial gaps, and also long-term long-term factors like aging population also has a very high uncertainty and affect the global economic growth. The other one is that we know this year is a global election year. It will also bring more uncertainty to the future's global landscape and oil market. So the other uncertainty is the extreme weather. We can see the destroy of the loss from the extreme weather, but we cannot predict. So it will give more uncertainty on future's energy security. The third one is the geopolitical situation. This is very hot topic and also very uncertainty issue that influence future's stability of energy issue. And lots of scholars have taken this point. Overall, the current issue facing energy security not only reflected in the increasing source and the impact of energy security risk, but also in the disruptive change in the mechanism of energy security impact caused by climate change and green transition. So when we consider the solution to energy security, I think we need to also consider how to reduce the uncertainty in this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I would turn to you, my esteemed colleague at the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs, the economist Philip Pilkington. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the title of the panel, I think, is Energy, Technology and Trade. I think we've had a massive natural experiment in the trade of energy and technology over the past few years, in that there's been some interventions in those markets which have been quite unusual. So perhaps we can start with energy to try and assess how successful or unsuccessful these interventions have been. With energy, I think we can refer to an event that's happened only in the past few days, which is that the German day-ahead electricity prices have once again spiked, this time higher than they did during the initial days of the Ukraine war. Why are they spiking? Well, it's not exactly clear yet. It's only been a few days, but it may have had something to do with the fact that the Biden administration, on its way out after the election, decided to impose additional sanctions on Gazprom Bank on the 21st of November. Gazprom Bank is the means by which Europeans currently buy gas from Russia. They still do buy gas. Russia is still the second largest provider of gas to the European Union. So energy prices are spiking once again. These additional spate of sanctions have been put in place. These have been held off until after the election, which may give you some idea that they might be additionally aggressive and that the Biden administration did not want to risk them initially. In October, Volkswagen announced that it was closing 3 plants in Germany. I think those are the first plants that have ever been closed by Volkswagen in Germany. I think it's become pretty much conventional wisdom at this stage that Germany is deindustrializing unless something changes. So I think here we have quite a, as I said, a strong natural experiment in what it means to mess around with energy markets. Obviously, the initial sanctions and so on Russian energy were designed to try and hobble the Russian war machine, as the Biden administration said, but they seem to have hobbled Europe instead, and they may be leading to a deindustrialization process in Europe. So I think from that we can probably get the sense that messing around with global energy markets is not the greatest idea and can have strong blowback effects. In the field of technology, I think the key intervention, shall we say, in global technology markets have been the semiconductor sanctions placed on China. I think these started in the Trump administration, but they've been carried on in the Biden administration. These were nominally for national security reasons, but they had the end result of restricting Huawei's mobile phone production, smartphone production for a number of years. What has happened since then? Well, it's a very interesting story, actually, and it was one that people in the semiconductor industry, in the South Korean semiconductor industry, actually warned of when these sanctions were put in place. China were trying to developed their own semiconductor industry, but they had a very hard time selling them because it was easier for the buyers of them, the Chinese domestic buyers like Huawei, to buy them from external firms because those external firms were better known. They were, stable supply chains rather than testing out the market. The new Chinese suppliers that were backed by the government through the Big Fund program in China. Well, when the semiconductor sanctions were placed on China, the semiconductor buyers in China had nowhere else to go, and they went and they started buying domestic semiconductors from these new companies. So again, I think that the end result of the policy was not the stated goal of the policy. So I guess what's the overall takeaway from these large natural experiments that we've had in the trade of tech and energy over the past few years? I think basically it's a vindication of International Economics 101 that's taught to undergraduates, that interfering in trade is a dangerous game, and it doesn't always have the consequences that you have. It can be highly destructive, and even if you think that you have a clear goal in mind, it might backfire on you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. And among the initiators, last but not least, I will turn to David Goldman, who is the Deputy Editor of the Asia Times and the Washington Fellow of the Claremont Institute. David, the floor is yours.
Globalization is accelerating. It's moving like a glacier, crushing everything in front of it. And I think that's inevitable for a very simple reason. We are at one of the great demographic turning points in history where the working age population of high-income countries is shrinking and will keep shrinking through this century. The working age population of middle-income countries is expanding and will keep expanding. The way we've done business, all of us, for the past several generations, is going to come to a terrible end. To begin with, the United States cannot continue to run a $1 trillion trade deficit forever. Our working age population is shrinking. We have a $20 trillion net negative foreign investment position, and we have an expanding internal debt. So whether it's Donald Trump or someone else, this has got to stop. The one country which has succeeded partially in transforming its economic profile towards the place where the people are, the global south, is China, which now exports more to the global south than to all developed markets combined. So these two trends, the demographic and the financial, dictate a shift to the global south. Are we prepared for this? Hardly. The countries of the global south still are swimming like goldfish in the old fishbowl. You dump it out into the bathtub, they still swim in tight circles, thinking of exporting to the developed markets as a quick way of making money. So the global south economies are still dependent on exports to the United States on the US trade deficit. They have to shift their attention to creating domestic demand, building a middle class, building consumption, and higher living standards in their own countries. The technology trends point in this direction. Digitalization, particularly digital broadband, is perhaps the single most important technology to hit the world since the railroad. 80% of people in the developing world, more or less, are in the informal economy. It means they've got no capital, they pretend to pay taxes, the government pretends to give them services. Digital broadband allows the rapid formalization of the economy, and we see that as digital broadband hits the 60% penetration threshold, the rate of formation of new business blossoms. So the idea of gated trade, of controlled trade, and so forth is simply nonsense. It has nothing to do with the fundamental underlying trends. Where does Europe stand in all this? Well, as we've heard from several speakers, not particularly well. Europe's trade deficit with the United States is on par with China, and when Donald Trump looks at Europe and China, he doesn't hate Europe and China, he hates trade deficits, which means you can't keep living on exports to the United States. Europe's answer, if it is that, to China's Belt and Road Initiative, the global gateway, is woefully inadequate in size and very poorly organized. I think that Hungary has been visionary among European nations in orienting towards Central Asia, which is one of the fastest areas of population growth. And the connectivity between China, Eurasia, and Europe offers Europe an opportunity to correct this before, as Philip Pilkington just told us, it becomes deindustrialized. But the clock is ticking. Europe is behind the curve. You don't have very much time to adapt. And if you fail to, your living standards will fall and your economic importance will shrink. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And we have 6 discussants also to have their say. However, please be mindful of the time because we will not have a lot of time for discussion, but your thoughts are very welcome to challenge those of the initiators and also to initiate yours. So first, I would turn to Mr. Ashok Malik, who is partner of the Asia Group, India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Friends, I bring to you a slightly more realist perspective. I had a business consultancy in India. Before that, I was in government. I deal with the world as it is, not as it should be. And I guess that realism is germane to our times because we are in a very gritty period in contemporary history. I have 3 broad points to make. One, at the commencement of this century, we as in all our countries, especially India, Europe, many other countries, had a wide-eyed idealism about free trade, about trade pacts, trade agreements, and where they could take our countries and lift all boats. Reality hasn't quite turned out that way. There has been pushback. There has been against globalization, against free trade, and the terms of globalization are being renegotiated. Globalization as a process continues to exist, but the terms are renegotiated. Increasingly, countries are looking to each other not for trade agreements, but for supply chain agreements and for technology relationships. This is leading to 2 kinds of relationships. One, those driven purely by market economics. You look at the cheapest producer. Energy markets are driven by cost and nothing else. If Mr. Putin gives me gas at a cheap rate, I'll buy it. If Mr. Trump gives me gas at a cheaper rate next year, I'll buy that. I'll switch. However, technology is very different. Technology is not being driven by cost. It's being driven by geopolitics. It's being driven by trust. Every country has its own version of small yard high fence, which is the term used by Jake Sullivan, the outgoing US NSA. And I've heard a lot about green transitions here. I've heard about China's indispensability to the green transition. I've heard about electric vehicles. Now, the fact is, when you buy an electric vehicle, it is not a consumer choice. It's a geopolitical choice. Because electric vehicles are huge digesters of data. And we know what that means, what that could mean. Therefore, if Europe or the US or India buys one set of electric vehicles rather than the other, it's a geopolitical choice. The same goes for semiconductors. We are moving into an era where semiconductor producers are being told not to produce in what might be the cheapest location, but to look at a more trusted location. Once this process reaches its culmination, it's the end of free trade in semiconductors. It already is. My final point, as my time is running out, is that trust is a big factor in today's geoeconomics. And this is not just an empty or wide-eyed emotion. It's something very rooted. It's trusted geographies, trusted sourcing, trusted shoring, trusted connectivities. We are in a location which is at the crossroads of Europe or Eurasia. Connectivity has been part of its history. Countries and companies are going to choose trusted connectivities, not necessarily cheapest connectivities. I'll end there.
Thank you very much. And now I would turn to Ceyhun Emre Doğru, who is managing partner at the Corpora Consulting from Turkey. Ceyhun, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So I would like to make and provide a very simple conceptual framework that can help us understand what's going on in the world in terms of economic and political order. So earlier, there were a lot of discussions about the dysfunctionality and discontent with the global governance, and Mr. Balashorban also mentioned the age of sovereignty. And I would like to translate that into what it means for economic policies and economic order. And I will argue that now we live in the age of economic security. And this is a trend that's happening regardless of ideologies and political parties. And I will prove that with a couple of data points to you. The first one is what Biden administration has been trying to do. Mr. Malik just mentioned Jake Sullivan. I will also refer to him. In a speech to Brookings Institution, he made a very important remark saying that for the sake of market efficiency, we shouldn't be allowing American industrial base to hollow out. So, and we have seen that in the economic policies of Biden administration as well, like Inflation Reduction Act, Chips and Sciences Act, so trying to attract basically most of the industrial investments back to the United States. And most recently, there has been a lot of discussions and debate about the European Union and its values. Most recently, we are also seeing the same trend in the European Union as well. Von der Leyen Commission has been very clear in emphasizing that it's going to prioritize economic security. Indeed, last week, the new vice chairman of the European Commission, Sejourne, he basically said that the European Union should pursue a Europe first policy. When other markets are closing, why should we remain open? And that brings us to the question of how this can be implemented. And here I will refer to an important concept that's called economic statecraft, which is the selected use of economic and strategic tools for countries to achieve their national and economic objectives. Industrial policies play an important role in this, and industrial policies basically create a balance of power against market fundamentalism, where industrial policies are pursued by the governments to ensure that certain industries are not only creating profits for the businesses, but also helping governments to achieve their political and social objectives. So the question is whether this can be achieved in the near and short term. How can governments and businesses can deal with a world order that seems to be geoeconomically fragmenting, but also there has been a lot of discussion about competitiveness. Countries and businesses are trying to be more competitive. So in a nutshell, we are going very fast towards a geoeconomic order that is based on economic security, and governments and businesses should be very well prepared for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay Humbey. And upcoming is my esteemed colleague from the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs, the foreign policy analyst, Péter Pákánics. Péter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. There were much talk on technology, and indeed the fourth industrial revolution is taking place in an environment of reglobalization, but we should not overlook the fact that without access to raw materials, to resources and supply chains, there is no technology to talk about. And securing access to raw materials is defined by raw power politics. Based on all what has been said in this conference, it is generally understood that a turbulent transformation of international relations is taking place. However, I argue that geopolitics are characterized by monolithic rules and instincts. Control over trade routes and energy resources are major catalysts of geopolitical competition. It has been for time immemorial. Just look at what happened to Nord Stream, what happened to the Iron Silk Road, what happens on the Red Sea. This is not a symptom of reglobalization or the so-called crisis of multilateralism. By the way, multilateralism is not in a crisis as it was not functioning at all unless a specific issue was backed by the intentions of a great power. Multipolarity is a chance for plurilateralism to do the job that multilateralism failed to do. It is a mistake to do geopolitics with soft power or so-called value-based foreign politics. A very fine example of this is the EU-Georgia relations, where the European Union attempted to establish normative power by the export of liberal democracy. without security guarantees and without sustainable perspective for economic and financial connectivity and partnership. The South Caucasus, as our esteemed colleague from Armenia highlighted, is a case study for the failure and strategic systematic failure of EU's neighborhood and foreign politics. The region is of key importance for European stability and energy security, and therefore for economic competitiveness. And yet the EU abandons its intentions to integrate Georgia and is withdrawing from the region and is generating another competition of great powers, which Russia, after the fall of Assad regime in Syria and possible de-escalation or normalization in the foreseeable future in Ukraine, might seize as an opportunity. So is Azerbaijan ready to seize any opportunity to strengthen its positions? Iran is also another regional player ready to return to a previous status quo. So my short remarks conclusion might be for the new European Commission to reevaluate its neighborhood policies. More than 10 years have passed since the last successful round of enlargement. Turkey is further away from the EU than it has ever been. There is a war in our neighborhood. It's high time to reinvent our neighborhood policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I turn to our old friend, Carlos Roa, who is contributing editor of The National Interest.
All right. Thank you. Okay. That's the wrong image, I assume. I'm very simple, and I just think there's a saying out there that kind of encapsulates the current reality, geopolitically speaking, which is there is no high-income country that is low energy, which highlights the simple reality that you can't have any advanced form of economic activity without the requisite energy. Do you want international trade? Those cargo ships need to be powered somehow. Do you want advanced digital technology? Data centers require energy. Do you want manufacturing? Energy, so on and so forth. And since we live in an international environment, which we have global energy prices and everyone wants to develop or redevelop or reindustrialize or so on and so forth, the brutal reality is that we're all in a race to try to meet energy demand. Energy supply is either barely keeping up or trying to keep up. We've also told ourselves at the same time that we need to pull off the clean energy transition for both practical and ideological reasons. Now, my family comes from Costa Rica, so I can assure you, having grown up in a lovely seaside house where I can see the water levels rising every few years, I'm very cognizant of this reality. But at the same time, we've seen in recent years the energy shock after the Ukraine war, Germany deindustrializing, as Phil Buckington said, and the competition for AI, which requires data centers and building a lot of those, to the point where 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor is being reactivated. We have the reality that the green revolution, as currently is, just is not able to keep up with rising demand. I'm not saying that solar or wind are bad in and of itself. Again, I am very much in favor. The reality is that the future of the world depends on continued access to energy-dense sources, which can provide us net energy, i.e. more energy than we get, a lot more energy than we expend acquiring those sources. We are now entering the age more than before of energy realism, and we now need to reevaluate current models and approaches and ideas of how to manage energy policy, because it underlies everything. So we're going to see a nuclear renaissance. We're going to see increasing battles over oil and gas and pipelines and so on and so forth, and this will shape, I think, the geoeconomic character of the coming century. And I'll try to win back some time and say I'll stop there.
Thank you, Carlos. And now, Mentor Becca, Executive Director of the, sorry for if I mispronounce it, but the Sami Frasheri Institute from Albania. I really hope I was right.
I hope it will work. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. And I'll start by reclaiming a meeting of President Nixon with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. He asked him what he thought about the French Revolution, if it was a success story or not. And the answer was fascinating. It is too early to say it. So even after 200 years, it was very early to say if it was a success or not. Now, we are witnessing a time of huge transformations, and I'll try to bring up some very macro level tendencies that we can witness. These are some correlated developments in both domestic and international politics, epitomized, I think, by the post-liberal momentum. The decline of the international liberal order is evident for two main reasons. Relative decline of the US power, the reduction of US influence, which was crucial in maintaining the so-called rules-based international order, has significantly weakened the liberal framework. Secondly, domestic crisis of liberalism, which is facing a crisis at the domestic level in many countries, leading toward a post-liberal condition, and Trump's resurgence exemplifies the peak of this trend. This is the first one. The second macro-level trend related to the first one is, I believe, the subjugation of economic logic to the political logic. At the international level, we observe an increasing overlap between geopolitical and geoeconomic spaces. Although this trend is still in its early phases, data indicates its growing prominence. Specifically, countries are engaging in trade over shorter distances than before and increasingly trading with geopolitical allies rather than adversaries. Furthermore, we are witnessing economic decoupling among major powers and geostrategic competitors, such as in the case of US and China, European Union and Russia, and so on. The implementation of new tariffs and sanctions is likely to further consolidate this trend. I believe that there are some countries that are in a better position to navigate these developments, and these countries, we don't have time to elaborate it, are the United States because of consumption-based economic structure, India because of the increase of foreign development investments, and I think there is hope for EU as well because of this kind of homogenized economic market that EU has, and it's in a better place to face the regionalization of economic competition in the future. I expect the same logic, of course, to be extended to the realm of technology and energy transition, the competition over which will empower the great power politics logic. As the data becomes the new global currency, the contest to have control over it, it will be even more intense, and I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And from an academic viewpoint, from Naoyuki Yoshino, Professor Emeritus from the Keio University, Japan. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I was a former Dean and CEO of Asian Development Bank Institute, and in 2019, I was a chairman of the T20 and the Japanese G20. I would like to make 4 points. Manufacturing industries has created production networks and value chains, and efficiency has been increased in many parts of Asia and also globally. However, still cross-border trading costs a lot in the sense documentation and lack of digitalization. So improvement of efficiency is definitely needed, especially among developing countries. Their time costs and economic costs are 4 times as much as advanced nations. And in order to introduce those technologies, I think private sector financing will be important. If efficiency is improved in those cross-border trading, then the rate of return for the private investors will rise. Secondly, services trading is also increasing. And for example, if you come to Japan for the restaurants, we order everything by QR code. Then there's no ladies to serve those dishes. The robot will bring the dishes from the chef. And in the hotels at night, nobody's standing there. Just we come into the hotel, everything will be by robot. So I think huge technological progress is going on, and that will increase the productivity. Thirdly, the fiscal deficits are growing after COVID-19 and high prices of oil and natural resources. I am the advisor to the Palau president and also Cambodia. They have started to issue digitalized government bonds. And people can purchase those government bonds without any paper. So that means domestic investors are starting to purchase government bonds. So it is very important to sell government bonds to domestically in order to keep sustainability. And digitalization is working in those countries. Lastly, transfer of green technologies will be very important from advanced nations and also from high advantage industries to small and medium-sized enterprises. In order to transfer those green technologies, money is needed. So probably carbon tax or carbon pricing will become the sources of financing to those transfer of technologies. Even though in Japan, carbon tax is not so favorable, but some money is needed for those transfers. That's all my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for all of you. According to our format, there will still be a chance for the initiators to answer and to conclude their thoughts very shortly. And we have like 5 minutes of free conversation now, so no heated debate is possible at this point. So I would rather ask you if you have clear and short comments on what has been said, and please raise your hands.
I have to say, women are still a minority on this panel. When we talk about technology, energy, and trade, we have only 2 women on this panel. And my question is exactly on one of the issues and points raised by Violeta, which is about the gender issues and imbalance in technology, which I haven't heard from anyone. So I would like to know, how can we include more women first into the discussion and the process? And third, about the issues faced, such as, for instance, it is a fact that women, when we talk about the gaming, or even about the way, even on social media, it is reported that 1 out of 5 women are actually victims of what we call technology-facilitated gender-based violence. As rightly mentioned, women tend to be stereotyped, hypersexualized, or even victims of abuse. So this conversation today with all amazing people and people who have experience and maybe the tools to help the women across the world, especially those who may not have the voice or the tools or even the access to such platforms or knowledge to be able to seek for help. So I would like to hear what are the possible solutions, strategies, and like if we say the main theme of this panel is connecting the dots. So how do we connect the dots? Thank you.
Thank you. And I would suggest that you answer during your final remarks. And obviously, we will not have time to go in ample details. But I have to tell you that for this panel, originally, it was meant to be a lady who would moderated this. So there would plan 3 women at here, but nobody's perfect, but I'm a substitute. Sir, can you have your comment as well, and then we should really move on.
Just a very quick remark, because we were said that we want to be realists here. There is no energy transition. I mean, the world is burning more coal, more gas, and more oil than ever before in absolute numbers in its history. India gets its power generation 75% from coal, it's 61% in China. So the idea that you can replace this with wind and solar when demand is growing faster than capacity is simply not possible. And as Philip pointed out correctly, Europe has been running the experiment of the energy transition for 30 years, and we see now the results of this. So I'm surprised and I have to admit slightly shocked when I still hear about how the energy transition will be the source of welfare and prosperity, when we see in Germany, in Denmark, and the United Kingdom that it's the exact opposite.
Thank you very much. Maybe the third one, the gentleman over there. You.
Yes, thank you very much. It's just a very short remark. I might not agree that there is no energy transition, but I would like to emphasize something that probably could be worked upon more consistently is the fact that green transformations currently, especially in lower and middle-income countries, are being hampered very severely by the debt crisis and the middle-income trap. And as long as this is not being addressed more consistently, there will be more difficulties in those countries. The second point is that, for sure, the bulk of lower or middle-income countries in terms of trade globally does not represent very important figures. However, they do represent very important figures in terms of the number of people. And if this is not being addressed, then we will go into a severe crisis, which probably will be even more important than the one we are currently witnessing otherwise.
It's very great that we have a discussion. I have exactly the opposite view of the gentleman on the other side. It's not just that we have an energy transition, it's going much faster than we think. It's going very, very fast. Look, back in 2009, we had the climate conference in Copenhagen. That was the absolute disaster of climate conferences. We all went back home, absolute desperate. Obama was there, and Merkel, I mean, all leaders were there, and we thought we should save the planet, and nothing happened, and we were desperate. What not one single person in Copenhagen ever hinted to was the fact that the price of solar energy would fall by 90% in the decades later. China has now reached peak coal. Reaching peak coal this year, may have been last year, maybe next year, but China is reaching peak coal. And China is adding 2/3 of all new renewable energy into the net. China alone is 2/3. Rest of the world is 1/3. The largest solar plant in China, which is in Urumqi, is now 4 gigawatt. Well, that's as much as the entire grid in Nigeria. That plant will very soon be 8 gigawatt. It will be expanded to 20 gigawatt. This is absolutely enormous, and the EAA and all the other energies have drastically underestimated how fast this transition will happen. Moving on to India, the Indian state of Gujarat, which, yes, agreed, is the lead state in India, they have an ambition of 100 gigawatt of renewable by 2030. And they're well on the way to doing it. The Adani Group in the deserts of Gujarat is now establishing what is the largest solar and wind facility in the world. That one is 30 gigawatt. I mean, most people don't understand how much gigawatt is, but 30 gigawatt is huge. 100 gigawatt is even a lot more. And India will also very, very soon replace coal and oil and gas with solar. It's not that, yes, it's a bit slow until it's fast, but that's how all transactions in the history has happened. Back in the 90s, I met a lot of people who said, oh, internet is a flop. It will never take off. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs back home in Norway, we had a lot of guys who said, oh yeah, internet, it's a fashion, it will go away. Well, it didn't go away. And solar has now reached that critical point where it's taking off at a very high speed because of one factor, price. Scale and price. When it's big scale, it's also low price. And yes, China is leading this, but we see it in India, and we will see it in many other parts of the world. Vietnam is doing a lot, but Asia is the lead, and we need to open our eyes in Europe and see what's happening over there. India has the largest floating solar in the world. Prime Minister Modi just launched a program in India for 10 million homes of solar panels on the roof. Well, 10 million, that matters. One home may not matter, but 10 millions matter. So a lot is happening, and China and India is leading this transformation, and it goes much faster than anyone could have thought of, thanks to one factor, price. Yes, there are some issues. We need grid, we need batteries, but that's also happening quite fast now. And you need land, because solar demands a lot of lands, but that's of course why it's happening in desert areas like Gujarat, which has a salty desert where nothing can grow. So to conclude, it's happening very, very fast, and we will see it speeding up in the years to come.
Thank you very much. Violetta, please.
But it's great to have this discussion because that's shaping our minds.
Thank you. Violetta, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I would be very happy if this gender issue is replied by a gentleman, because I thought that that's the question, how the question was raised. But since you directly addressed me, I will try. I mean, I have a very positive experience with gender-balanced teams. But first of all, in many different cultural frameworks, men need to be educated how to deal with mixed teams, how to behave in gender-balanced teams. That's one way. The other thing is quotas. I was very much, as an engineer, basically against quotas. Later on, I saw that in order to overcome a few thousand years old prejudice, you have to interfere with some regulatory frameworks, which gender balanced quotas are very appropriate ones, and they prove to be useful. The other one, which is very interesting, and it's my personal experience, is governmental institutions should lead the way. When I came to the Commission, we had 24% of female leading positions covered by women. And President Juncker said, before we leave, I want this figure to be over 40%. Nobody believed that in 5 years, 42% of the leading positions within the EU were taken by women. Just with a very simple invitation for women to join and promise the fair selection process. How little it was needed. The maybe most important one is that all the statistics show that boards and teams that have women on board, they are by far more successful. In average, about between 20 and 25% more successful than just a single, either only women or only men teams. I'm very much in favor of that. And last but not least, if we want to really have a balanced world, and my dear colleagues, men, you have to decide, do you want to live in a prosperous world, or you want to live in the world of divisions, wars, and conflicts? If you want to have a balanced, prosperous world, you need to make an effort and bring women at the decision-making tables, because then we're going to have a holistic, systemic solutions that will follow. I'm going to just conclude my intervention. I wanted to respond to some other comments, but I will just say that we actually all together, based on today's sessions, which show a really good reflection of the situation in the world, I'm more and more convinced that the VUCA world is actually happening and nobody knows what is coming. And we are lost, we are afraid, and some very old-fashioned, old framework-based solutions are trying to be pushed forward. The bilateral fights, war, and conflicts seem to be the only solution. Bring women on board, we will find solutions together which will be innovative, inclusive, and sustainable. We do not want to deliver babies for war. That is a clear message, and I'm saying it everywhere. Please put that into your mind, my dear colleagues. We do not deliver babies for war. We deliver them to prosper and contribute to sustainable, prosperous society. And only together we can support each other to go beyond the fear and see optimistic future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My job here is to keep the time limit as I can, so, but don't think that I don't think those are very important and interesting debates. Only we have to be quick from this time on. So please, Sujan, how would you conclude your thoughts?
Very briefly, I think it's lamentable that while we are trying to connect the dots between energy, technology, and trade, the harsh reality is that on all three dimensions, the world is increasingly being divided. And there is utter lack of agreement today. Now, trade is fungible, and it's virtually impossible to interdict trade. It's structural in nature, and that is why the world has moved away from decoupling with certain economies or geographies towards more practical de-risking. Technology is a space in which it's possible to have greater imposition of restrictions and controls, because that's where governments and big tech have spent billions of dollars, and it's a more restricted space. On energy, I think it's disastrous that the world is already divided, but we are going to see a combined use of all forms of energy in the foreseeable future. So I think the developed countries need to wake up, smell the coffee, and realize that things like CBAM and harsh coercive measures is really not going to advance the agenda for net zero. There should be much more focus and sensitivity to the requirements of adaptation and green transitions in developing countries. And I would say that Mr. Solheim has already done my job by actually speaking about India. But let me end by saying that India has also been in the lead with regard to the International Solar Alliance, in the lead with regard to the Green Grids Initiative, which is also known as the OSOWOG acronym. And India has also been the only country to have fully realized it's fulfilled all its Paris Agreement commitments well before time. So I think we need to have that space and sensitivity to recognize what developing countries like India are already doing, while cutting some slack for multiple uses of all forms of energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Arvind.
In the interest of time, very briefly, on the gender issue, I think to ensure the mistakes of the past, where we had a huge gender divide in the digital space, we need to ensure that as we move towards a responsible and inclusive AI world, we have a diversity of data. This is equally important to get as diverse data as possible, because it's not just the programmers and the coders which bring out biases, but it's the data bias that in the AI world that also leads to unfair artificial intelligence algorithms. And two is to have equal number of women on the programming side to write the code, to work in the field of AI. So I think the future has to be fair, transparent, and ethical. And in that, we need data diversity and equal participation from all genders, all cultures, and all societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tian Huifeng.
Yeah, thank you. Since the gentleman mentioned the coal consumption in China, I would like to share a joke from a scholar. He said, maybe the God is unfair, since he gave lots of oil and natural gas to US, to Canada, but give lots of coal to China, to India, to South Africa. So we have no choice, but we also do our best to try to make our energy structure adjustment. Eric has shared lots of information, but I would like to add more. One is that in this year, China has passed the new law, new energy law. This will be take effect in the start of the next year. This law has raised the goal of non-fossil fuel energy production around 25% by 2030 and over 80% by 2030. This is a legal binding target given by the law. The other one is in this year that China has reopened its voluntary trading system. It's supplementary to the national carbon market. And also China has, the Central Bank of China has share quite similar green finance standards with the EU. They have jointly published quite a similar common classification directory of green finance. So all this, I guess, we cannot design this fact that we have tried our best to push all our standards close to the internationally and to make our efforts on green transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip.
I'd just say quickly on the European energy issue, I'm really shocked actually that Europe aren't recognizing that the energy crisis currently in Europe is an existential crisis of the sort that Europe saw in 2011 when there was a sovereign debt crisis to which there was debate and there was a response. Just to give one example of this, because bad economic effects can have enormous political effects, there's currently no functional government in France. The debate in France that's led to a lack of functional government is over the budget. They cannot pass a budget right now. We did some simple calculations and found that the entire increase in the deficit between, back in 2019, 2018, when it was relatively stable in France, and today is due to the energy price subsidies that the French government is currently engaged in. So I think Europe really needs to wake up and realize that energy and economic crises can quickly turn into political crises, because Europe's had a very, very rough time learning that lesson in the past, I think, of the interwar period. So I really hope Europe take that more seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Apart from endorsing Philip's point, I'd like to emphasize that the technological and demographic trends which are driving the world economy at this point are completely irresistible, and attempts to control trade or deglobalize will simply fail. Best example is the United States putting tariffs on Chinese goods instead of importing from China. The United States ended up importing from China's trading partners, mainly Vietnam, Mexico, Indonesia, India, and elsewhere. The only way we can go ahead is to manage these trends and make sure they benefit the largest number of people and don't get out of hand, but to try to stop them is just folly.
Thank you. At this point, we are not stopping the conversation and the heated discussion. We just relocated to the antechamber, to the coffee break. Thank you very much for participating, and also for the audience. Please join me in applauding.